we think impact investing is absolutely essential to bridging the gap for the Sustainable Development Goals. We know, all of us know, the impact that we can have through finance and the untapped potential for what we can accomplish together. But it's important to understand that we're operating in an environment where there's a trust gap. There's some great research that the UK government just did, the Department for International Development, which I think many of you will probably know, DFID, where they surveyed the general population of the UK and found on the good side, that's about 70% of the respondents would like to have opportunities to invest in impact and sustainability. But there's also a huge issue with they don't trust that the financial institutions will fulfill the impact that they claim to have. And I think on the bright side, many of them did say that they would be willing to revisit that lack of trust if there was real evidence of impact. And I think that gives us a sense of how important this work is in the broader context of where we are at this moment in the world. We need credible, comparable, and consistent impact performance data that will allow us to bridge this trust gap, and ultimately will allow us to mobilize the capital that we need to really move the needle on some of the world's most pressing challenges. Measurement is critical. It's important that we have a generally accepted system for measuring, managing, and optimizing impact that allow investors to understand first whether they're having the impact that they're seeking to have, so they can compare the results in clear and consistent ways, and also so they're making investment decisions based on impact performance data, not just financial performance data. At the GIN, we are committed to driving the harmonization of impact performance data and throughout impact measurement in general. And I will say we're already seeing a tremendous amount of progress. Harmonization has been at the core of the GIN's work since we were founded 10 years ago. One of our founding kind of initiatives was IRIS, a catalog of metrics for measuring social, environmental, and financial performance. And over the last 10 years, through IRIS, we've collaborated with over 50 different sets of metrics, frameworks, and principles that are all really critical to advancing this market. That includes initiatives like HIPSO, which I know many of you are involved in leading. But we also came to recognize that investors need more than just a catalog of metrics that they can use to measure their impact. But what they actually needed was an overall system for impact measurement and management. And so we launched IRIS Plus just a few months ago this year to have out in the market a readily available system for measuring, managing, and optimizing impact performance. It's built on 10 years of our work in IRIS, leveraging all the work of our partners, and we engage over 850 stakeholders in the development of IRIS Plus. So with IRIS Plus, we have great coverage of key sectors that many of you are investing in, including affordable housing, financial inclusion, and smallholder agriculture, among many others. But there's still some sectors and themes that we have not yet developed. And jobs is a very critical gap, and that's what brings us all here today. We know that jobs is important because it's part of what all of us do. It cuts across sectors. It's very important to driving economic development. But getting harmonization on this issue has been very elusive for us collectively. We think that this initiative is so important and really commend the work that you're all doing. I hope that you see the GIN and IRIS Plus as a partner in this. And we're hoping to work with all of you as this initiative progresses to help build out the jobs theme in IRIS Plus, leveraging the experience of all the participants in the session. So I want to thank you for the work you're doing on the joint impact model. And I hope that this is a very productive webinar, and please count on us to be a partner and ally in our collective effort to make sure that we maximize our collective potential and driving the capital that will ultimately help have the impact on the world that we know is so critical at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Amit. I think it's great to hear that from an organization like Global Impact Investing Network, that we can continue to work together and find harmonization in these critical issues. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. And next up is Anis. She is from CDC. She's been heavily involved in the development of this model, and she will be talking a little bit more about the GIM.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, just getting the slides up on the screen there. Thank you, Julia, for that introduction. I just want to give you a little overview of why this is so important to us and the process we took before passing you over to Sabine from Steward Redqueen to talk about the methodology itself. So why do we want to model the indirect impacts? The direct impacts, as we're all aware, is just a fraction of the impacts we see from our investments. For example, with employment, you get the impacts from supply chains and wages, and additionally there's impacts coming from the economy through electricity and financial services. Therefore, measuring these indirect impacts is really important for an organization like CDC and my fellow collaborators. However, the indirect impacts are really hard to observe, and for the small portion which you can observe, it's often really impractical to measure, particularly across a large number of projects. And we needed a way to assess this indirect impact for each project and investments that wouldn't be so time-consuming and costly to have to reproduce for each individual investment. So this was the challenge we were all facing when we decided to start modeling the indirect impacts. So why harmonize at this stage? There's been a massive growing demand for transparency and harmonization from our stakeholders. And with this, a growing number of actors in the space with different approaches, leading to even less transparency and more confusion on the topic of modeling. Coming together not only allowed us to answer the call for transparency and harmonization, but enables us to collaborate and share learnings around the model itself, but also with respects to findings and insights that can be generated from these models. Finally, it allows other parties who did not have the resources to get involved in modeling to join the initiative, start learning, and further increase that potential for further learnings. So with all this in mind, we got together, and in the collaborative, many of us have been modeling some form of indirect impacts for several years. They all had relatively similar bases due to similar needs in terms of resourcing and being investment institutions. So it made sense to start from that point and come together. We worked with Steward Redqueen, who had assisted many of us from the beginning, to come together on this work and come up with a joint approach to the modeling. Step one was to design a collectively agreed upon methodology, a model, and the input requirements based on the experience and existing models of the group. This would lead to an aligned approach to calculate and report indirect impacts. The next objective was to make it available to the public in some capacity. We didn't want this to just be a group of 4 or 5 DFIs getting together and sharing amongst ourselves, but we wanted to open this up to a wider group. Finally, we wanted to work with other institutions going forward to further improve the model and its functionality. So this is just a starting point, not the end goal. Okay, so some of the features of the model. What is it? It's an input-output model, which uses financial flows of projects through the economy. These financial flows can then be translated into other appropriate impacts that can be measured from these flows. Currently, we've been developing the jobs and value added, as this is the existing tool which most organizations involved in this have developed, and therefore it's the most harmonized approach. However, with the importance of climate change, GHG emissions was also added. We are conscious that there is little consensus on the GHG emissions accounting, and we wanted to use this modeling as a first step, as well as a place to launch discussions on the topic. However, it's important to note that, as with all impacts, this is not intended to replace more advanced project-specific calculations or observable monitoring of impacts where possible. So that's just a brief overview of what we're doing. And I want to hand over to Sabine from Steward Redqueen so she can talk you through more detail about the model itself.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction to the GIM, Anise, and for explaining the harmonization process so far. While I'm speaking, I'm just checking whether I can share my screen. Yes. Can you all see my slide deck? Right, perfect. So yes, my name is Sabine Dankbaar. I'm working for Steward Redqueen. For the ones that don't know Steward Redqueen, we're a consultancy company from the Netherlands specialized in impact and sustainability. We've been working with impact investors for many years to help them obtain better insights into their indirect impact. And since January, we've been a driver of this initiative to develop the GIM, or the Joint Impact Model. So very happy to give you a first glimpse of the model today. My presentation will cover the following 3 topics. I will start with a short introduction of the key features of the GIM, expanding a little bit more on what Anise just introduced. Second, I will show the interface, which gives you a glimpse of how the GIM works and what it looks like. And third, I'll explain the main elements of the GIM methodology. We only have limited time in this webinar. I'll just talk you through the key highlights of the model. So if you would like to learn more, feel free to get in touch with us. We'll provide more details on that later. So let's start with what the GIM is all about. One could say that the GIM has 5 key features. First, through economic modeling, the GIM is able to reveal previously unknown indirect impacts of organizations. These are both economic and environmental impacts. Second, the GIM quantifies these impacts using a harmonized approach. That means that the methodology and assumptions used in the model are consistently applied across portfolios of all users of the model. This approach is fully transparent. So information about the methodology of the model, the scope, the definitions, assumptions, limitations, this will all be published alongside the model. It's clear for all users what's included and what not. That the GIM brings together best practices in impact modeling. In the GIM, we take a collaborative approach. So we combine insights and learning from multiple organizations and research studies. And we aim to continue this approach in the future. So we welcome contributions from other experts in the field. And you can see this as an open invitation to you as an audience to engage with us on this. Finally, we will make the GIM open access. It will be shared on an online platform where users can run the model independently using their own input data. Then a little bit more about these indirect impacts that the GIM reveals. As Anise already mentioned, the model provides insight into 3 key impact indicators. These are value added, employment, and G&G emissions. Value added is actually the sum of all salaries, taxes, and profits in an economy, and this is also broken down in a model. Employment, that's the number of jobs that are supported, and to give you some idea of, or give users some idea of who the jobs are for, we can actually break them down in jobs for women and jobs for youth. The third indicator is GHG emissions, which is a sum of CO2 and non-CO2 emissions like methane or nitrous oxide. So these are the main indicators, but these can actually also be combined. And that's quite a nice aspect of the model because the scope of measurement for all these indicators is the same. You can also combine value added and employment insights, for example, and look at what the value added is per job or what the salaries are per job. It gives you some indication of the quality of jobs, although there's many other aspects to quality as well. The same for economic effects and environmental effects. So you can actually see the trade-off between these two on a portfolio level. So then what's the scope of these insights that we're measuring? Well, it all starts with the investee. Through its operations, the investee has a direct impact on the local economy. Let's take an example of a fruit producer. The company employs people who are working in production administration, pays its workers a salary, it pays taxes, and if all goes well, it makes a profit. The company is also likely to emit GHG, for example, due to the distribution of its products using trucks. This is all the direct impact measured by the GIM, the direct employment, the direct value added, and the direct GHG impact. Ideally, this data on employment, on salary payments is collected from the investee itself. Only when absolutely necessary, we use modeling to quantify this impact. But investees not only affect society through their direct operations, but also through their supply chain, which generates a supply chain impact. So this fruit producer, this company might source bottles and fruit concentrate from local suppliers who employ people to produce these inputs. Subsequently, these suppliers again source some inputs from their suppliers, for example, from farmers who grow the fruits. Together, the impact at suppliers and at suppliers makes up the so-called supply chain impact. It's measured by the model. Furthermore, all these people employed at investee and working at suppliers, they earn a salary. A part of this salary they respend in the economy on goods and services. Households buy groceries, for example, and pay rent. This generates the induced impact. However, for some investees, the key impact that they make is not related to their supply chain, but to the use of their products. So let's take a solar company in Senegal. It's likely that this company imports its solar panels, so the local supply chain impact of this company will be limited. However, by providing electricity, the company enables economic activity. The users of the electricity might be able to run their machines for longer periods of time without having to shut down due to outages. This is a so-called enabling impact, and the model is able to cover these enabling effects for electricity and financing. At this moment, these two impacts are included only, and this can be expanded in the future. So then, let's now have a look at the interface and see how the GIM works. So basically, the GIM follows 3 steps. First, users need to fill out their input data and upload this to the model. Subsequently, the model runs its calculations, and finally, results are visualized. So the model is still work in progress, but we're able to already show you a beta version of the model template and interface so that you can see how this actually works in practice. So what I'll now do, I'll open the input template. See the file. So this is an example of what an input template could look like. So the format can be tailored towards the needs of each organization, as long as certain rules are applied. The impact indicators should be inserted in the column, and the investees should all have their own line. The model uses a flexible approach. So if organizations have good data coverage, the model uses all relevant data inputs. But if you have only limited data available, the model can work with that and make additional estimates to come up with results. So for corporate investments, the minimum data requirements are shown here. So it's the fiscal year, it's the country or region of operations, it's the economic activity, sales, and direct employment. So based on this data, the model is able to run. However, if more data is available, this can be included and will actually refine the model calculations. This will also be reflected as we will provide some level of robustness per type of impact measured. So the optional data that will improve model calculations includes information on total procurement, for example, company wages, payments to government, so that's taxes, net income, etc. Once input data is filled out, the template can be uploaded. The model will then immediately calculate results and visualize these in an interface. Let's have a look at the interface. This is what you will see when you've uploaded the data. On the left side, you see several filters that you can use to filter results on. So from the index cell file, I had investments for 2016, for 17, and for 18. Most of them were for 2018. As you can see now, the results pop up. You can also filter on sector, on country, and on some other indicators. Then here you see a box with investment data. This is the data actually that you put in. So you see for which year the data is, the number of investment that you put in, and the sales revenues related to these investments. That's actually a driver of the results. Then here on the right side, you see the results, broken down per impacts category and per phase in the value chain. So you have the direct impact, the supply chain impact, the induced impact, and the power enabling and finance enabling impact. In this example, I didn't include any power project or finance project, so you see them there. Then at the bottom, you have several visualizations of the results, where you see here geographic distribution, bar charts, and distribution sector. And when you hover over a country, you can actually see the country impacts. When you click on the sector, you see more details per sector. All right, well, hope this gives you a bit of an idea of what we're aiming for. Then I go back to my presentation and present you the methodology of what I've just shown in the interface. So how do we quantify this impact that you just see? The GIM estimates these indirect impacts using an input-output methodology, or also referred to as IO modeling. IO modeling traces company revenues to an economy, revealing linkages between the company and other domestic sectors. We can trace these money flows using a statistical representation of an economy known as a social counting matrix, or SAM. SAM describes financial flows of all economic transactions within an economy. So it shows how consumption and export of a company's goods and services leads to transfers of money between sectors. These financial flows reflect the indirect output and value added supported by a company. These outputs can subsequently be linked to data on labor productivity, and GHG intensities. And in that way, we're able to quantify the value added, the employment, and the GHG impact related to a company. So labor productivity ratios are, for example, the number of jobs per unit of output. The GHG emission intensity that we use are the GHG per unit of output. And because we know all the outputs related to a company, we can also measure these impacts. In this slide, you see an example of what a SAM looks like. The columns represent buyers and show expenditures, and rows represent sellers and show receipts. But then let's take an example and let's go back to the juice producer. The juice producer is a food processing company. In the SAM, we have a column food processing, which shows how a typical company in the sector spends its money on other domestic sectors, on imports, and on salaries, taxes, and profits. So we can use this spending pattern to break down the revenues of the juice producer and analyze how much this company spends on suppliers, such as the plastic bottle supplier, and how much it spends on value added and imports. Subsequently, do the same for the suppliers of the juice producer, such as the bottle supplier. We can use the SAM to trace how this plastic bottle supplier again spends his money on inputs. So, and in this way, we can use the SAM to trace all money flows related to an investee. How do we get this data? It is data available for 121 countries and 65 sectors worldwide, which can be used to compile the SAMs. For the same number of countries and sectors, the GTAP database also has GHG emission data available. The employment data we use is coming from the ILO. The ILO has harmonized data available for 189 countries and 14 sectors worldwide. And these data sources are then complemented by World Bank development indicators. From this data set, we use its indicators of GDP growth, private sector capital stock, and electricity consumption. Then why do we use this input-output methodology? As mentioned earlier, the IO methodology enables the quantification of indirect effects of companies along their value chain, for which real data is often not available. It thereby gives users a more complete picture of the impact of the investees. The model is applicable to a full portfolio, so it can be used for large heterogeneous portfolios of investments in all countries and all sectors worldwide. It has a low data burden. The model only requires statistical data for one financial year, which is ideal for developing countries where there's usually a lack of statistical information. Finally, the model has strong explanatory value. It not only provides numbers, but also insights in how these come about, what the drivers are. This helps organizations to better understand how they can improve their impact. However, there's of course no model without limitations. So there's some limitations that users should keep in mind when they work with the GIM. There's several methodological constraints. So the SAM is static and does not consider supply chain constraints. That means that it assumes that all companies' demand can be met by local suppliers or importers. The model does also not capture price effects and substitution effects. The latter means that it does not consider that the job at the investee might replace a job at another company in the country. So hence the model produces gross impact effects, not net effects. Furthermore, there's data source limitations. The model uses best available statistics. However, as you might know, data quality and completeness is an issue in developing countries especially, and that makes it the base year. Some data sources can be a few years behind, or that the coverage of data for some countries can be limited. Third, the GIM neglects unique features of investments. So the SAM model is based on economy averages, as I just showed. So individual investees are likely to differ from these averages. However, on an aggregate level, these differences are expected to level out, and outcomes therefore become more accurate for a larger number of companies. Another limitation is that the model is strongly dependent on revenue data. For some investments, collecting revenue data is not straightforward. For example, data on the potential revenue increase due to improved access to infrastructure, such as roads, is often hard to obtain. And lastly, the model focuses on the investee's country of operations only. It does not include effects related to imports. And keeping these limitations in mind, the model can be considered fit for purpose. The GIM helps to meet the demand of organizations to better understand their indirect impacts. It is a model that enables organizations to obtain these insights in a harmonized and transparent way. We hope we gave you a good impression of how we aim to do this today in this presentation. However, this is not the end point. It's a joint process for continuous improvement. So we invite you to join the discussion, share learnings, and provide suggestions. Yeah. So thanks so much for listening so far. I'll now hand over the floor to Lorraine of Proparco, who will provide you some insights into the practical implementation of the model.
Thanks, Sabine, for developing more about the methodology and the model itself. Let me just share my screen. And go through a bit of practical application of such model and how we could use that for learning and other objectives that we will have. So basically, it all started with individual institution approaches. Proparco, CDC, and FMO started actually a couple of years ago to work in parallel, actually, on how to model indirect impact of our project, especially on jobs. Indeed, we realized that sometimes the direct job effect is more for projects, but the indirect job impact is actually probably way bigger, but it's not easy to observe. Especially that happens for infrastructure projects or for finance, which are important sectors for us. So Proparco, CDC, and FMO actually in parallel had this input-output model that helped us to model jobs and sometimes also value added. For Proparco, it was mainly focused on renewable energy. For CDC and FMO, that was actually a model that would be able to model job for everybody, for all sectors, I mean. And each time the idea was to propose an assessment methodology or something that would be replicable, not just for one project, but for all the projects, or for not just one sector, but for all portfolio. Applicability has been developed a bit differently from the different organizations. Proparco is project level, and we use the model that we have at the moment for ex-ante assessment during due diligence. CDC use its model at portfolio level and mainly for monitoring purposes, while FMO use this for new commitment at new commitment level and for ex-ante assessments of new investment. Current use then therefore is a bit different from one institution to another. Proparco mainly on investment decision and reporting, while CDC, since looking at the monitoring side, is using the results more on the strategic level, trying to learn from the results, but also monitor and report on it, and FMO mainly reporting on the results. If we go down to one example, I've actually taken an example from Proparco's project. So that would be what you would get on the power enabling impact side if you look ex ante. So we had two projects, like I'm showing now two projects. One is in Ukraine, 110 megawatts of wind project. It's a big project in the next to the Crimea region. The total investment is a bit more than, well, close to 2 billion euro. The wind farm is supposed to operate for 25 years, and we got some construction expenditure, some operation expenditure, with an idea of the percentage of what is locally procured, especially for the construction expenditure. In Kenya, we have a way smaller project, a bit more than 50 megawatt of wind power. The total investment is 127 million euros. Operation is going to last 20 years. And same, we have construction expenditure, operation expenditure with an idea of what is locally procured. And as you can see, that gives us with quite different results for jobs and for value added. So total job that we got from the model in Ukraine shows an impact of this project, the Ukraine project, for 618 jobs. While in Kenya, we had an estimated impact of 15,000 jobs, more than 15,000 jobs. So how do we get to these different results? Well, that actually highlights the fact that the power enabling side is looking at two pathways: the price effect of more power production and the reduction of the outages. If you compare Ukraine to Kenya, in Ukraine you have hardly any power outage, while in Kenya you have a bit more than 30 hours a month where you don't have electricity. The electricity consumption per capita is also very different. So on one side, adding more electricity in the economy has a bigger impact because there is, it fills a bigger gap in the economy. On the second side, the economic structure of the two countries are different, with a bigger agriculture sector in Kenya, while in Ukraine you will have the services are more important in the GDP, and this goes also with different labor productivity, and that has also an impact on the sector that are going to be helped by more electricity in the grid, and then from the sector to jobs. That also gives you the idea of the value added that you will get investing in Ukraine rather than in Kenya in a different project, where you can see that in Ukraine, twice as big project as in Kenya is actually creating only 8 million euros of value added, while in Kenya, half the size of the project is going to create 45 million euros of value added. That's what we estimated. So it's interesting learning for us, because that also shows you that it's not just the size of the project that is important, but also the country, the structure of the economy, the structure of the electricity grid has also an impact on the job impact that you can expect from a given project. That leads us to moving to our initiative today, the joint impact model. So obviously, at least at Proparco, when we started with the infrastructure and power, we wanted to learn more on other sectors also. So that's why we decided to join the initiative. Also to be able to collaborate with other experts, get a common agreement of what works, what doesn't, what works better than other things. So the scope is all sector with different pathway of output. Finance enabling, electricity enabling are not going to be calculated exactly the same way as an agriculture project, for instance. And the model is going to be able to estimate backward effects for sectors, and also forward effects for instance, finance and electricity. The applicability, obviously, you can still run the model with just one project, pre-investment, with estimated sales and profit that you expect to see. But we do think that it's more interesting to use that as a portfolio monitoring level. Using it portfolio monitoring level would give you a bigger confidence in the results, and also confidence level would also will be provided for all data, and they would depend on the granularity of input data. Basically, we have the model enables you to put must-have, which are like high-level data, or more granular, nice-to-have data. And the more granular your input data is, obviously, the bigger the confidence is on the result that you get. On the other side, some underlying multipliers have been estimated from case study, where we've been on the ground collecting the data, observing what has been happening. Others have been modeled so far. So depending on the way we've been calculating these multipliers, the confidence interval will be bigger or smaller. For future use, our idea with this joint impact model is to be able to actually do joint reporting, being careful with the confidence level when they're a bit different from one data to another. That also helps with joint learning, develop collective understanding of our common impact on the ground, and that would help us collectively to improve strategic decisions. So the final result is that it's going to facilitate reporting for common clients, because we will collect the same input data for all clients. So that should help on that side. That increased comparability of activities and results and performance that we show, and that should help us to improve collectively. Thank you. And I hand over to Julia for the next steps.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Lorraine. We are getting a lot of questions on the chat, so that's really great. Please feel free to continue sending them. We will do our best to answer them in the Q&A session. I think that there were some sound quality issues, so please reply in the chat if you are unable to hear, because we want to see if there's something wrong with the webinar. So let me just, as Lorraine said, I'm going to touch upon the next steps. So you guys have now heard our model, how we plan to use it, how it works, the methodology. So what are the next steps? Well, for us, we have very important next steps, which is to continue to collaborate with experts in the field. I think one of the questions in the chat was about how does this differ from IFC model? Well, it does differ, but we have an open dialogue with them, and we will be working together in the beginning, the end of this year, beginning of next year, to find possibilities to bridge those gaps. So we're very much looking forward to that. We've also been in open communication with people from ILO to see what kind of data they have that could help us make this more robust model. And we just want to share views on how they view indirect jobs modeling, and we're opening this conversation up with everybody who is interested. We also have additional good news. We're working towards setting up a nonprofit organization so that we can make this open access for all interested parties. Those who are interested can go on jointimpactmodel.com and put your name and your email address in there. We want to be able to further collaborate with you or contact you and let you know about our launch and future seminars. We are hoping to launch this open access for everybody end of Q1. And so, yeah, if this is something that you feel will help your institution accounting for impact, then we really welcome you to join us. And we think that the more people we have in this initiative, the more powerful it can become, and the more we can talk about this, these methodologies, the more it can improve. So please join us. See. So that's basically it in terms of next steps. We will now do our best to take some of your questions. And yes, for everybody who is asking, we will be sharing the presentation. I have your email from the Eventbrite sign up that you've done. So we will be sharing the presentations and also the recording of this. So I will take one of the first questions. I think, where does the data come from? I think that one we already answered a little bit. But there was another question: to which extent may we invite other sister institutions? That one, of course, you can invite as many institutions on board as you want. As I said earlier, we really want to expand this and have many people use it. I have a really interesting question from Shazad about attribution. Well, the interesting thing about this model is that it allows you to do both. It allows you to either apply attribution or not apply attribution, depending on the inputs that you put in the model. If you put the inputs for attribution, then you're able to attribute. And that includes equity, it includes debt, and you would be following the FMO methodology on that, because we haven't opened up the broader conversation yet on how we can harmonize this. So for now, the model has the FMO attribution methodology, and we are more than happy to invite others to talk about this and how we can what your views are on attribution, because we also have a lot of questions. And then the follow-up question, I think, Sabine, you can take on how we measure supply chain impact for financial services company, for example, a bank.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Actually, for banks, it works actually the same as for other investments. So the starting point is the turnover of a bank. And then by using the SAM, which gives us a spending pattern on how an average bank spends its money, we can actually trace the turnover of the bank through the economy and see what the supply chain impact is of a bank. However, for a bank, the key supply or the key impact is not its supply chain, it's financing. And for banks, we can actually, we have developed a methodology to provide some insights into the effects related to the financing of the banks. We have done additional research into this, and it's just because of time limitations, we can't really go into it, but this can be included in the model. So the enabling effects of the financing of a financial intermediary can be included in the model, or is included in the model.
Thanks, Sabine, for that. And just so everybody knows, the methodology paper will also be published, and it will include all of the information that goes along for this, which it requires a longer explanation that we can provide in the last 7 minutes of the webinar. The next question that we got is from Cor Vattel from Wageningen University. And yes, the first speaker, Amit, he did mention that jobs is difficult to harmonize as an indicator. The way that we have approached this in the gym is we all knew that this was an important indicator that we had to report on, and we each had our own methodology and ways of doing it. So what was important to us is to really come up with a joint version of how to do it and to open up the conversation with other experts. And that's how this this started. And we're reaching out to not only other DFIs, but other MDBs as well, and investors to see how is it that we can come up with the best solution. This is what we're proposing for now, but the door is open to continue working together with others. But yes, it has been very difficult. We have been working on this. We've all had our own methodology, for example, FMO since 2016, but it has taken us since January to get to this point. As far as it being an alternative to IRIS, that's not how we view it. Actually, we're building upon what IRIS has already, the work that IRIS has already done. IRIS has the indicators, but they don't necessarily have the tool to calculate indirect effects or indirect impact. So what this means is that we are actually, we're complementary to each other. So it wouldn't really be an alternative. We're not coming up with new indicators that are supposed to replace the IRIS indicators. We're just using the IRIS indicators to then calculate and come up with indirect impacts. And then if we're talking about the IFC modeling, that's something that Alex McGillivray from CDC, he tried to answer that question. So definitely we are looking to work together with IFC more to bridge the gaps, and we already have a timeline in place on how we can do that as we continue to communicate with them. The next question was, oh, the GTAP one. That's a really good one, and Sabine will be answering that one.
Yeah, so GTAP has data available for 120 countries worldwide. So for these countries, we use the country-specific SAMs. But of course, there's some countries for which we don't have specific data, GTAP data available. And in that case, we use a regional average. So for example, for Congo, there's not a country-specific table available. And in that case, we use the average for Middle Africa or Central Africa to quantify results for Congo. So we always use the best available data, and if that's country data, we use country data. If country data is not available, we go one level higher and use regional data. Yes, let me take the next question. That was about an average multiplier on employment. Unfortunately, we're not able to provide any results just yet. But as soon as we have results available that we can communicate on, we'll let you know. As Julia said, please sign up for provide us with your email address if you're interested, and then we keep you updated about these titles.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Sabine. So there are a few more questions, and we will do our best to answer them. We will be sending out an email because I know that this is an interesting topic, and I can see that there's a lot of interest as well. But there is a question about a focal point to liaise with. You can email me. I'm adding my email here. It's g.debernardini@fmo.nl. And if you have any specific questions, you can email me, and I will work together with my team to be able to respond to as many questions as possible. That being said, we do of course want to provide a proper domain name, and that's linked to the jointimpactmodel.com website, so that we can all have a conversation about this. But please go ahead, and if you are interested and if you like what you heard today, put your name down on the website. We really encourage you to do that. And that's basically, I see Alex here. He is still answering some questions in the chat. So we will also make sure to provide some of the chat questions and the answers that Alex is providing on there when I email everybody after this webinar. But now it is time. So thank you so much, everybody. It has been really great to see the interest that everybody has been showing, and we really look forward to working together. So please keep the conversation open. Thank you.